So we're having a little feedback meeting with a lady called Tamsin who attended a session on the 9th of May, and it's now the 17th, so it's just over a week since the session. Obviously people share useful truths and with big picture, and we have to be sensitive towards people not always wanting to share those widely, but what we can do is talk about the insights which came out and the things that we can learn from that other people can use. So, oh, he's Tamsin, fantastic. Hi, Tamsin.
Good morning.
Hello.
Let me just turn the video on.
Hello.
Hi.
Woo.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are things?
Yeah, they're good. They're good. I found the whole thing really useful in many ways, and I don't think. I mean, actually having the time while you're talking to the others for me to be hearing what their views are and thinking about how it compared to my view on my company, that's actually a useful thing to have as well.
That's interesting. So as the brain is processing information, clearly for my prompts initially, but I think almost that tails off towards the end. You are requiring less prompts, partly due to the fact you're picking up the patterns and the ways of making connection yourself, and that is also being helped by the conversations that you're hearing.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think because, I'm sure if you had something like 8 different companies, that might be a bit more difficult to be picking stuff up. But if you, with the 2 companies there talking things through, it did give me time to see the similarities and the differences between the companies and our approach. So I think there was actually some benefit to doing it with more than just one company involved. I mean, having said that, I think I found it very useful in itself. One of the things I was going to say was I really like the fact that you've got this structure in the big picture, but I see on your thing that the structure itself is sort of faded in the way you've printed it out, and I'm sure that's deliberate because you're quite happy to allow me to go beyond the boundaries and group things slightly differently from the structure. And I found that quite freeing, because when somebody enforces a structure on you, then you feel you put things in a box where actually you think the boxes should be a little bit more flexible. And I think the big picture approach that you use lets me use it as a guide, but also move a little bit to out of the boundaries where I feel ours is slightly different. So
when might you have realised that, Tamsin? Was that as the page landed on the table and you saw it was a certain type of grey, or was it a combination of that and my positioning, or was it the fact that you did something and I didn't tell you off for doing it?
It was actually a combination of all 3. You're absolutely right. So it's difficult to know. I think the thing is that all 3 of those worked together to give a message that it was okay to push the boundaries a bit. And I think the session. I think the session needs facilitation. This facilitation really enhances it. I mean, I think if you just had the paper without, the paper is a really good guide, but your facilitation on top of the picture really helped draw things out.
Yeah.
And your comments on where people are doing things that might be slightly unusual, or asking them about why they've chosen to put something in a certain place. I mean, that prompts a deeper reflection on what you're doing than if you were just doing it on your own.
I think you mentioned a number of key bits there, points that I'm just writing down as you're talking. One is the greyed outness, and I always joke that I spent a lot of time waking up thinking, how grey should it be, to there's Pantones, and my graphic designer Darren and we had great conversations about how grey it should be and shouldn't be to attract the right kind of engagement.
Where we do similar things with putting post-it notes and paper and encouraging people to write on and change things. Yeah. So for me, your big picture is a really nice example of that, as something that gives someone a guide, enough of a guide, but is clearly, again, because of the grayed outness, it's clear that it needs you to add stuff to it. So I think that for me, the message is really clear already, that this Excellent. Is just a canvas, a canvas that gives you structure, but which you can make your own.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. And the note I've made is when I'm training up practitioners to run this, so it's not always going to be me, because there's a train the trainer element. That has to be clear in the facilitation, because it comes naturally to me, it might not always come naturally to the practitioner, and they have to be clear that it is positioned as an adaptive framework, something you can adapt. And actually, when someone does that wonderful sales box, which doesn't follow my template, like my initial reaction is, oh my God, it doesn't follow my template, but I quickly overcome that and think, how wonderful, Tamsin is thinking something that I really want to find out about. And that's the adaptive framework element. And the only other note, because I'm really aware, Tam, and I'm sure because we are the characters we are, Tamsin, this conversation will continue, but I'm also really disciplined with time, because we've both got other stuff on, but I'm really enjoying the chat. The other thing you mentioned I wanted to pick up on is a nuanced point around the different people in the session and the conversation. I think 2 companies in a session is good. I think, as you said, 8 would be too many, but there is a kind of sharing experiences across, and maybe 3 would be a maximum of different companies, because otherwise it would get too complicated. What we also tested without realizing, and confirmed a little hypothesis that I've got, is that you doing it yourself with the page is a relationship between you and the page, which causes a bit of self-reflection. So you're open to ideas and prompting, but in effect you are really relating and working with the page with my help, and then it pops out as a question or a point. When 2 people like Elaine and Phil were working, then it creates a conversation between them 2. And if you imagine some subgroups within a company, that is a really strong pattern where you get, if it's one company with, let's say, 3 or 4 subgroups of 3 people, that is really the optimum. That's how I prefer to run it. So it's one company, 4 subgroups made up of 2 or 3 people. So you're getting everything there. You're getting the individual reflection, you're getting reflection within the subgroup, and then they get incredibly curious as to how they're doing against other subgroups, and then you use that energy to flip it onto the board at the front, and that is one of the facilitation techniques. That's almost optimum. Clearly in the hub it's a bit different, because we have entrepreneurs who know their business inside out, and generally it's a singular or couple relating to the page, so it's slightly different. But if you can see the reasoning behind where I'm at.
I can see that entirely, and I think that's a very nice thing as well, to see it as supporting both individual reflection, but also the ability for teams to discuss ideas. And I was just wondering, when you were describing that, whether, because I was doing it on my own, then if I had an idea, I immediately put it on the paper, and then I've externalized it, and then I get to think, is that right or not? I wonder where you've got a group looking at it, whether they are slower to commit to the paper because they need to get agreement between the group before they draw a line on the paper. And that I can see having pluses and minuses to it. They're having the discussion in the group before they commit to the paper. But what you have described about having the subgroups is really nice, because actually they get the subgroup becomes like an individual. that's having a discussion with itself and then putting stuff on paper. But then when you compare subgroups, bits of paper to each other, they get the opportunity to see that it could have been done differently.
I love that. And actually, what I like about it, I think I recounted the story of the pupils at Sherburn School about putting them forward. Whatever happens, happens. You have to go with the flow, because these are people who are sharing their truth. So I can facilitate it, but it leads to some interesting times when you actually don't know what's going to happen. It's not command and control. It's
no, not at all.
Let it flow and react. One of the examples of the challenge, and we flipped it into an opportunity, is a recognition around the difference between the end user and the client that you're selling to.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to offer that up. Any kind of reflection or thought about that big picture helped you with, or you saw differently? But I don't want to prejudge. It was just a reflection on that point.
Yeah, so drawing it into this framework, it did help. It confirmed what we had already started to realise, which is that we are selling to conference organisers, but our end users are the people we end up having the strongest relationship with. And so we need to find some way of benefiting from that strong relationship to make sure that our actual customer is aware of what we're managing to deliver on their behalf. And so I think it really highlighted that.
Beautiful. And I noticed you carried that over into your left-hand side in the opportunities, probably interestingly, you put them in 2, 3, 1. So you fiddled around with that order. I just noticed that, actually. I didn't pick that up on the day, but only on reflecting on it, I can see you've done that. Anyway, I'd love to go into that further. There's so many things we could go into, but 2 last questions. This is more from a process perspective, from my perspective. So we had the session on the 9th. It's now the 17th. One of my earlier questions, but we got off into a lovely other conversation about great stuff, is where your big picture is now, which I know it's physically with you, because I think you've looked down and referred to it, and I've got a digital image of it.
Yeah.
What would be the best way for, if you imagine you've gone along to a session, or someone like you, if I may, has gone along to a session, and I want to carry on that conversation, and I always leave it a week just to reflect, because if it's absolutely rubbish, people don't know where the big picture is. They don't remember the session. It's just another lazy webinar. But actually what I tend to find, I can afford to leave it a week. So linked to that, if I was to want to follow up, or big picture corporation, the offering wanted to follow up with workshop attendees, what would be most useful for you to get the most value out of what you invested in terms of time last week? What could I do to help you the most?
Goodness, that's a good question.
We're bombarded with so much stuff from everywhere, and we have to filter. I want to be absolutely clean as a whistle by saying something. I could give you some examples if it helps.
Well, one thing, since you've brought this up digitally, I'm going to say one thing for me. I could obviously do it myself by taking a picture of this, but actually, since you've already got the digital one, I think having a digital copy would be useful for me, particularly because we're spread across Europe. I mean, when I go next week to Frankfurt, I'm going to take the paper copy to show the others. But actually, if I had the digital copy, that would be useful as well.
Yeah.
In terms of what else you could do, I mean, given that we did this in a pair with another company, when I talk to my other my partners, to be able to, if the other company were also happy with me having a copy of their picture as well, because that would help me to explain the similarities and differences that we noted in the session itself. But I can see that might be an issue.
That's a really, I mean, obviously there's a sensitivity issue, but actually people are generally more open if they can help others. That's interesting that such a strong connection was formed with who you were in the room with. You're still using those compares and contrasts as a value-added item afterwards. And that's linked to something. And if I may, and I don't want to load this question too heavily, but it's a bit of an insight into where I want to take the business. And it's just a thought. You don't have to say yes or no, but at least you can say, I can see your reasoning behind it. Where I see it going is following a session. That is a digital image of a big picture that you've got the analog version of, because people always want to keep it. People always, their content, it's like the best compliment. No one ever wants to leave it on the table. They all go. Even the board content always goes and is kept by the client. What I want to do in the end is to take that content. You keep the analog copy. I take a digital print, and we put, as big picture, we can put that into an app, which is the same content but in a software version, an application that you can have on a tablet or laptop, where you can move the symbols around. So an offering back to you would be, here's the digital print of the photo, really important analog proof. Here's the content in the app, which you can now do all the usual stuff with sharing. You can run a call like this on Zoom, but you can move the symbols around. This is actually an image behind me, but if you imagine me picking up the measure symbol and moving it, it would be on the app. And I see that in a wrapper of a community where conversation is encouraged and thoughts develop and connections are made and symbols are moved in the app. And actually, in that perspective, the tech is just an enabler to the human need to better ourselves and our businesses through conversation. And that's my thinking behind where I think I'm going to go with it.
I not only recognize your thinking on it, I actually think that's a really good idea. I mean, as you know, I asked for some blank sheets so that I could take this for my colleagues to also have a go at. And one of the reasons for asking the blank sheets rather than just taking the one I'd filled in was that obviously once it's filled in on paper, they can't change what I've done there, although they might want to. So on the blank sheets, they can do it slightly differently. But what I think would work better is what you just described, so we can actually go with the work that I've already done, but start moving it around and changing it.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a brilliant thing. I think there are an awful lot of meetings people have where they discuss ideas and everyone takes individual notes and walks away from the meeting with their individual notes, and actually no one goes back and reads those notes again.
Yeah.
Something like this that is much more visual, that captures all of the major things that were discussed, but is also updatable by people and can be taken further. Absolutely perfect. I think it'd be useful for all sorts of things.
Thank you for that. I will soldier on in my mission to make that so, and then I'll come back to you in a year's time and say, Tamsin, we can now do that. Come and join us.
I will be very happy indeed to see that.
Fantastic. That's great. One last thing, because we are slightly over time. I have to ask this. How would you describe big picture to others? Clearly, I'm asking because I'm interested in a summary kind of one-liner. If just off the top of your head, you're away at this conference next week, you sat over dinner, and what have you been up to last week, Tamsin? Oh, I've talked to this smiley, funny chap from Leeds. He's got this thing called Big Picture, and they say, "What is it, Tamsin?" And you say,
"Okay, I would say it's a canvas with a framework which helps you to think about your business and how you're running it in a very hands-on, creative way."
Fantastic. That's amazing. Thank you very much.